I'm delighted to say, joining us live from London, where all the eyes of the world are focused at this historic moment, and where he is up late at night and probably suffering from jet lag, it's Paul Murray. Paul, great to see you. How are you, mates?
Yeah, good morning to you, Rowan. G'day, everyone. Good morning, Australia. It's midnight here in London, and it is the turn of yet another historic day. Today is the day when Her Majesty's body will move from Balmoral. It'll move to a church in palace, in Scotland, where it will begin a process of multiple days of people in Scotland and then later here in England being able to file past her coffin. But I can tell you, guys, that from the second you get to the airport, driving all the way in, as many billboards as possible that normally would be flogging a TV show or the latest pop music no one cares about. It's all about Her Majesty. And certainly in the first couple of days, just less than a kilometre from where I'm standing here, we've seen history being made before our eyes with the proclamation of King Charles III being made today at St James's Palace. And even at midnight, there are even hundreds of people right now that are turning up to lay their flowers.
Paul, we now know that the funeral that's just been announced is set for September 19th, so that'll be an extraordinary day. Tell us some of the things that you're planning over the next couple of weeks, and also thoughts on William and Harry and any reconciliation there.
Well, I think it was well and truly for the cameras because you could see there were lots of little moments, if you want to read into the body language between all four of them yesterday. Pretty obviously that Meghan and Catherine didn't seem too interested to play nice, but that was one of many little moments which have been unexpected. There were lots of things that are expected after Her Majesty passed away, but the number of walkabouts, which of course were developed by the Queen, in fact back in Tasmania, back in 1970, when she was the first sovereign to be walking amongst the people, shaking hands, taking flowers, teddy bears and all the rest of it. Well, that tradition has continued all the way through to King Charles, even on the day that he became king. Of course, he became king the moment that Her Majesty passed away, that when he returned to the gates just behind me here, he got out of the car and stood there for the best part of 15 minutes meeting as many people as he could. That has been repeated in Balmoral with the rest of the Queen's children and some of her grandchildren, and it was repeated by, as you say, Harry and William and their wives at Windsor Castle, which is a place that Her Majesty spent plenty of time in the final years of her life, but all of it rather close, as you know, of course, how tight London can be. And while London still continues to bustle on, there are plenty of people who are taking the time to be here. And I just want to point out something as well to people who might be trying to judge the scale of this event versus, say, Princess Diana 25 years ago. Now, you would remember that just out the front of those gates, there was this ocean of flowers. Well, just as many flowers have been laid here for Queen Elizabeth, but what's happening every night is those flowers are being respectfully gathered and they're taken over to Queen's Park, which is not too far from where we are here, so a new group of people can get as close as possible to the palace. For our plans of what we're doing here for the week is Queen Elizabeth deserves 7 days of celebration of her life. The new king deserves us paying every attention to his first few steps, which seem to be pretty sure-footed. It was interesting to notice that perhaps the most nervous person while King Charles was formally proclaimed the king was his son William, who was looking over his shoulder as I think some of the enormity was falling on him about the ceremony he will go through eventually when his father passes. But the plan for the next 7 days and a little bit longer is many of the events will be happening about 7 o'clock, 8 o'clock, 9 o'clock at night Australian time. So they'll be right in the time that people are used to watching Sky News prime time. So myself and Peter Credlin will be here. We'll be doing a special 2-hour program this evening. We'll be on live as the Queen's coffin is moving through the streets of Edinburgh. We'll also have plenty of locals who've met the Queen in Australia, lots of insights here, but yeah, the whole point is to celebrate a life and be respectful about an incredible moment in global history.
Rita.
I want to ask you about Prince Andrew. He's in Balmoral. Is he going to be involved in the ceremonies that we're going to see in the coming days?
Not specifically. I mean, he will be part of the royal family that will be marching behind the procession that'll make its way from Westminster. Now, once the Queen's coffin makes its way back to London, it'll go into Buckingham Palace. Then it'll make its way through the streets of London to the Palace of Westminster. Then, of course, her funeral will be a few days after that. It'll be next Monday, again about 7, 8 o'clock Sydney time, as opposed to about 10, 11 o'clock in the morning here. His involvement, it seemed, we saw about as much of Prince Andrew, I think, in the past couple of days as there'll be any plan to see in the next little while. But one of the Queen's other children, Princess Anne, well, she's actually going to be accompanying Her Majesty all the way through the journey from Scotland all the way here to London. So she will probably be the most visible of the children. Other than King Charles. We don't know exactly what role Edward will play at this stage, but certainly Andrew was doing his best to get as many sympathy moments as possible, trying to be as emotional as he could be from the camera. But as you saw when he did the walkabout, he seemed quite nervous. He didn't want to walk too close to people just in case some ugly things were brought up, I imagine, Rita.
Daisy.
It's quite extraordinary, wasn't it, at the proclamation to see all the former Prime Ministers lined up in a line, you know, Boris, Tony Blair, David Cameron, and to think that this is actually the first time in history the proclamation has been televised.
Well, and this is the thing, Daisy, there has been so much modernisation during Queen Elizabeth's reign. I mean, we were remarking on the idea that 70 years ago, when she took over as the Queen, including of Australia, we wouldn't have been able to get to London within about a day, but now we're able to do it, and we were all able to instantaneously watch a ceremony that's gone on for hundreds and hundreds of years, but had never been televised. It was televised, of course, in full of arcane language, but there was something beautiful about that language. And I know as an old school Sheila, and I hope you don't consider that anything other than the compliment it's intended to be, lots of old language, lots of old symbolism, and that image of all of those Prime Ministers where they were all standing together. And I actually had the chance, just coming down a little bit earlier this evening, to have a chat to the photographer who actually had the opportunity to be standing right in the middle of those Prime Ministers. And she said that they were doing their best to make some small talk, but it was getting a bit tough after a few minutes. They didn't seem to have too much to say to each other after a while.
Rita.
And we did see with those walkabouts, as we call them, the Prince Harry and Prince Meghan joining Kate and William, and there were... The British are very polite. They're not going to say anything, most of them, or you know, be rude openly to someone's face. But there were a few moments there, particularly with Meghan, where the crowd, well, let's just say, weren't overly warm. They weren't particularly interested in shaking her hand. But just tell me about the mood there. Is it all about embracing all the royals, or is there still some hard feeling amongst people towards Meghan and Prince Andrew and some others?
I think because we haven't seen this, and most people haven't seen this in their lifetime, most people were just standing by and watching how all of this plays. Yeah, sure, all of us are playing a bit of amateur psychologist about what really meant this and what really meant that. But you're right, they are such a profoundly polite people. I think also the sense of mourning, I've got to say I don't get the sense of mourning. You certainly get a respectful recognition of this incredible woman. And I've got to say, one of the many events that will happen in the next week that is going to be quite impactful is when Queen Elizabeth's casket will be lying in state at Westminster, at the Parliament, and for 23 hours a day, for 3 days in a row, any member of the public will be able to, like the good British people can, stand in a queue, form an orderly line and make your way past. And I think that is going to be one of the key images when we look back over the little splinters that'll happen this week. But you know, they're a very respectful people, and what's cool to see too is that obviously there's always at any one time hundreds of thousands of tourists that are here who would always go past a place like Buckingham Palace, but they're bringing flowers with them. So there's a sense, obviously, of inevitability, of an understanding of what's happening here. There was that strange feeling where we all woke up in Australia to the news on Friday morning, Thursday evening at this point in time, and while parts of the day are about taking a step forward with the new king, the bulk of this week is about respecting and focusing on the life of Her Majesty. So there'll be plenty of moments for that, but part of this institution is to show continuity, and they've done that from moment one.
Paul, you won't be surprised that in your absence, our old friend Peter Fitzsimons and the Greens and Faruqi and all the rest of them have been up to their usual tricks. So we'll be looking at all of that later in the programme. But you mentioned King Charles, and you know, there must be an extraordinary...
You love saying it, don't you, Rowan?
That's right. There must be an extraordinary sense at the moment. You've got a new Prime Minister, you've got a new King. There's an absolute new era. The timing is extraordinary. Liz Truss has made a very impressive start in the Commons. Her Prime Minister's question was terrific, talking very Thatcherite language about aspiration and lower taxations and so on. We've also had King Charles in his opening comments, very reassuring. I'm going to be a constitutional monarch, implying that he's going to leave his activism and his issues, as he called them, to one side. So there should be a real... I was there when Charles and Diana got married. I remember that era of positive, like, exciting new era in Britain. I hope you're going to be getting that sense there.
Yeah, absolutely. And I can't be helped but struck, but obviously right in front of where we stand now and the pictures that you can see is that giant mall that goes all the way up through the park, and that's a place where, of course, just in July of this year there was a wonderful sense of those hundreds of thousands of people gathering here for celebration of her mark of 70 years on the throne. You could see that she was happy. I'm really pleased that she got this. I've got to say, the feeling that I've had over the past couple of days has been, thank goodness this is happening now as opposed to 12 months ago. Yes. We all know, of course, when the Queen had to farewell her own husband and do it by herself. But this is a full-throated celebration of her life, of the continuity. And I've got to say, too, without boring too many people, and I'm more than happy to fire up about those that want to make the most of this moment to say what our future should be it Republic or otherwise. There's always a bit of a misnomer when people think that it's about the personality versus the institution. And the institution itself has shown absolute continuity from the moment that the Queen passed. I think that for those who want to make the most of a Republic conversation, that won't happen in this term of the Albanese government. If they get a second one, most likely they will. I think it'll be something that we'll be talking about halfway through then. So by then we'll know whether Charles is the woke king, but by all accounts, by all promise, he's not going to be that. We're not going to be hearing about stories of him talking to the plants and all the rest of it. And I think that you've seen a shift in his tone, a shift in literally the way he presents himself. And I'm sure I'm not the only person that when you're watching the pictures, this bloke has obviously been in the longest apprenticeship of all time. You know, pretty long time to be going to TAFE to eventually learn how to be a king. But you could see that, you know, you had practiced those words, practiced those steps, practiced how to project yourself over and over and over again. So I think the people who thought that the institution instantly crumbles depending on who sits on the throne have no idea that that building's been around for a while. The institution has been around even longer.
Fantastic. Thanks, Paul Murray. Well, Paul will be there in London. Watch him tonight with Peter Credlin, obviously. Great to see you, Paul. Have a great time. And we'll be watching as the next couple of things develop over the next few days.